Good evening, and I'd like to call to order this committee of the whole meeting of the town of Saugeen Shores, and I want to extend a welcome to everyone in the council chambers this evening. The first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. Do so now or when it arises on the agenda. None declared, then the next item on the agenda is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and we have nothing under that. So we move down to delegations. This evening we have one delegation, and it's Bruce Martin and Scott Sanders. They're here from the Southampton BIA, and they want to talk about the Southampton streetscape. Welcome, Bruce and Scott. If you want to just come to the mic, and you have Mary Lou also. Oh, good. Just push the purple button there, Bruce. Yep.
Good evening, Mayor Smith and Council and Saugeen Shores staff. I'm Mary Lou Hills from Hills Insurance, and this is Bruce Martin from Martin's Home Hardware, and Scott Saunders, broker from Remax Land Exchange, and we are here representing the Southampton BIA Streetscape Committee. The SLG plan that was presented to Council in 2014 was to deliver a complete street system in order to enhance the destination potential of downtown Southampton. This was to be new infrastructure from storefront to storefront and all along High Street. The SBIA Streetscape Committee has revised the plan, and this will maintain our angle parking and some other existing surfaces that are in good condition now. This revision will result in a more affordable plan that can start to move forward. We will go ahead now and compare the two plans in the three main blocks in downtown Southampton. We ask the council include the SBIA and their revised plan in their budget submissions this fall, in hopes of beginning this project in the fall of 2017. And now Bruce will compare the plan block by block.
Mary Lou. Okay, so we're as Mary Lou said, we're going to show three blocks. So the block, or the picture that's on the screen, so that's the SGL proposed plan for Albert to Victoria. So on the north side of the street is showing the existing angled parking, and then on the south side of the street is parallel parking, and it shows curb extensions on the main intersections and a mid-street bump out. I'm just going to go to the next slide. So same block. This is showing the SBIA preferred plan, and so the north side of the street, the angled parking stayed the same, and we've changed the suggested parallel parking to maintain the existing angled parking. So with this will be consistent on all the slides that we're going to show you tonight, and the fact that the angle parking is just something we don't want to give up. We need as many parking spaces as possible because they're used continually. Just a few other comments about this particular block. The roadway is relatively new. It's in good shape, so it doesn't have to be replaced. And the only thing that needs to be replaced is the sidewalks there. They badly need to be replaced. So anyway, that's a summary for that block. On this block here, Grosvenor to Albert Street, the SGL proposal. And again, so on the north side of the street, we have the existing angled parking. On the south side of the street, they're proposing parallel parking. Again, there's a mid-street bump out, which is fine, and the main intersection curb extensions. So this being the center block of the three, the roadway is kaput. It needs replacing. The sidewalks are equally tired, and on this block, out of the south sidewalk isn't aligned with its neighboring sidewalks, so the sidewalk area is narrower than what the proposal would be. So aligning this sidewalk with the adjacent ones, it would make the sidewalk 3 feet deeper, which would be a significant improvement. And not where I want to be. There we go. Here on to Grosvenor Street, so the Walker House block and the bank. So on the north side of this is a lot of changes we're suggesting here. So this is the SGL preferred or proposed plan. So they just maintained a wee bit of angle parking in front of the Walker House, and parallel parking on the rest of the balance of the north side, a boulevard down the middle, and then parallel parking on the south side. And so there might be some aesthetic things happening, but there's just an immense amount of parking lost, and we just don't want to see that. Go to our proposal. So again, to our preferred, maintain the existing angled parking on the north side, maintain the existing angled parking on the south side of the street, possibly a mid-street bump out. That's all just a decorative thing or optional thing. And again, we have the curb extensions on the intersections, and so for the most part, it's status quo. With this block, the roadway is in excellent shape. It's relatively new as well, and the sidewalks are in relative good shape as well. So there aren't too many things that required or that need attention on this particular block. That's the 3 blocks. Scott, do you want to make a few comments?
Thank you, Bruce. So, in summary, the Southampton BIA is hoping to put this plan back in front of council, is hoping that we can, the Southampton Business Improvement Area, the BIA can partner with council to move this plan forward. We're also hoping that this plan could potentially be implemented in a 3 or 4 phase structure. So instead of completely decimating the entire downtown core at one time, I believe that it makes more sense budget-wise and business-wise for us to do this in a strategic, planned-out process over 3, potentially 4 years. But we'd like to hopefully put this in front of council that it could be part of the budget deliberations, which will happen soon for 2017, that we could be shovel ready and in the ground next fall, immediately following Labor Day weekend. We want to reiterate as well the BIA's desire to keep as much of the angled parking as absolutely possible. Those of us that are on Southampton's Main Street every day, 365 days of the year, know how vital that parking is to the success of our main street. So the BIA is looking forward to working with council and with the town staff to move this plan forward to revitalize downtown Southampton. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mary Lou, Bruce, and Scott. And I'm going to ask the committee if there's any, any questions or comments. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Scott, do you have an indication or a suggestion as to the preference for the phasing? What first, what second, what third?
I think of the 3 blocks that Bruce talked about, the Walker House block is probably going to be the most economical block to do. The East block, so the Home Hardware block, is probably the second most economical to do, and the Core Center block, which is the one that requires the most infrastructure, is probably the most expensive block of the 3 to do. So I think the real answer to that is up to council, and that is how much money and when money can be available. But if we were planning, for example, on the most inexpensive block to do that, but had the proposals in place for the core block and for the east block, then, should there be grant monies become available for infrastructure funding, we could be shovel ready, and then we could actually move ahead with some of those plans maybe earlier than anticipated because there may be some infrastructure money available as well. So ideally it would be the west block, the east block, and then the center block, unless council wants to throw a huge amount of money at it, and we would gladly assist at the table to make that happen.
Any Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you guys for the presentation and coming in tonight. Having been involved in developing the Southampton Streetscape Plan fairly directly, I know a lot of what went into it, and I was glad that we got into the discussion on parking and that that the changes got proposed, and then it went back to the Southampton BIA, and you guys had the opportunity to talk it through and really settle on where you see parking going in Southampton's core in the future. I'm always had my suspicion was always that it would go this way, that we'd end up sticking with angle parking, and that's fine. And I understand why the businesses in down Southampton want to do that, and I can certainly support that. But I guess I wanted to ask the question with regard to the rest of it. I was just talking to you guys about it before the meeting. With regard to some of the other elements in the plan, like the cycling strategy that's in there, like some of the work around the Southampton Town Hall and the Coliseum, is the Southampton BIA fairly satisfied with what's in the plan around those elements? Are there, if we are able to proceed along with some of the other factors inside the streetscape plan, can we proceed along with the sense that you guys are pretty content with that, and that working together we can sort of implement some of those things that are in the plan?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for your question. There is a lot going on above and beyond what we've presented here tonight, as you well know. It would certainly seem sensible that moving forward, changing road surfaces and so on, that would be the time to do other things like bike lanes or other things along that nature and get some of those strategies in place. I think, other than the funding, we're after a place at the table. So if we keep the dialogue open, you'll always know what we think all the way along.
Councillor Minaj, then I'll get to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for Made in Southampton design change. I think that's appropriate. But you will lose parking spots, right? The bump outs are going to cut the number of parking spots from the total inventory that you have today. And the sidewalks, I'm equally impressed with the idea that the sidewalk gets better treatment and a wider look. The one thing I can't seem to sell anywhere, and I was hoping maybe you would want to listen, and maybe we can go there sometime together, I can meet with you, is reverse angle parking. And it's a whole new game, and it changes everything. And I brought that forward for a review in downtown Port Elgin as well, where we have some opportunity to do some angle parking. It's a much safer way to park, and it lends itself well to your street and how you do your angle parking. Any interest?
The reverse angle parking, theoretically, is fantastic. It eliminates all of it's the safest way to angle park, but it would be we'd be reluctant to try just because of the human nature to see something which would appear backwards. And anyway, it wouldn't be, even the consultants, SGL, they're obviously very familiar with reverse angle parking, and they didn't recommend it just because of the fact that it's rarely seen, used, and it's just a radical change from what people are used to, even though it's a technically sound way of doing it.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had a meeting, some of us had a meeting with the committee last week, and one of the things that we talked about that your question, the Deputy Mayor's question brought up is, other possibilities, and the fact that in some areas we're doing sidewalk restructuring brought up the possibility of doing some work with accessibility, and so I just wanted to make sure that that was something that that we discussed, and that we're looking at that as a good opportunity to increase accessibility opportunities.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Just as an additional comment, through you perhaps to the CAO, how do we follow through and kind of put the parallel angle parking question to bed? Because we never approved the streetscape plan. We accepted it, I believe. So how do we make the decision that angle parking is a go in downtown Southampton? How can we get there? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. I would recommend that there's two steps. As we go through our budget process, which we are starting to do, I know the acting director of Public Works attended the same meeting, and I was there as well. So we have some of the basic information, and we will include that in our budget deliberations at that time. So when we bring it to council, we would be looking for the group as well to speak to it, and if council had concerns, they would raise it at that time. So we would be doing two things. One was we'd be approving the concept, council would be, and then approving the budget for it. I would also suggest that if members of council have any concerns, that they speak to staff or the community.
If nothing else, you came at the right time, because I know staff and council are, excuse me, preparing their budget deliberations and starting this right now. So hopefully we can get them done and make some people happy. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is communications petitions for Committee of the Whole action. We have one. We have received a petition to save the North Shore Park this evening, and I know we need some direction from committee. But before we get started, I want to say a couple things. Excuse me. I know council has received a lot of input into this into the park, and specifically this splash pad issue, and are listening. And I can assure you, we're trying to find a solution. And I suspect that. We're going to suggest a solution. Anybody can participate. I think we're going to try and refer this perhaps back to the REACT committee or Waterfront or both of them to hold a public meeting so that everybody will get an opportunity to speak to this particular issue. And I think the CAO has a suggestion, but I'll turn it over to committee here shortly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to take an opportunity to update council on where we're at and perhaps clarify a couple of things. Council will remember that staff did meet with the opponents of the North Shore Park location on site. I do want to emphasize it's the location. The folks that we met with weren't against the splash pad. In general, they had concerns with that location. And when we met with them, we committed to follow through on their concerns. Before returning to council with any final recommendations. And there were some concerns expressed that we were able to address. For example, we know that the original intent of the land bequest is no longer an issue, so we're continuing to work through those, and we will be returning to council for a final recommendation. Council did approve that location in principle only, so it's not a final location. At the same time, council and the community may know that we are currently working on a Recreation and Parks Recreation Master Plan, and we have hired, I would describe them as the preeminent Recreation Master Plan consultant in the province, and they've been working with a subcommittee of members of council and citizens, and that Recreation and Master Plan is due imminently. I understand that the draft version of the master plan was distributed either today or tomorrow to the steering committee members, and within that master plan, that's one of the things that we ask our consultant to do, is recommend where should we put parks, where should we put splash pads, where should we put ball diamonds. So that master plan will have a recommendation we expect or anticipate for splash pads, as it will with other facilities. So I expect, Mr. Mayor and members of council, that staff will take that recommendation. They will work with the Recreation Master Plan Committee. We'll take the recommendation. We'll blend it with the mitigation plans, if we're able to create mitigation plans for the concerns that have been expressed by residents. Again, we did commit to them that we would address the concerns that they had. And if we can't, then we may not propose that location. But we will take both of those inputs and the concerns expressed by residents before providing council with a final recommendation. The petition, as I've read it, supports many of our natural and normal park development processes. You know, there's nothing in the petition that we don't typically do, and we would certainly consider the intent of that, of the feedback we're hearing through the petition. We would be happy to facilitate a public information session for residents to have their concerns heard and addressed. I would respectfully suggest, Mr. Mayor, that it's facilitated either by the master plan consultant or by staff. A community committee may not be comfortable at serving on that role, but we would certainly engage the committee, but either facilitated by the Recreation Master Plan consultant or by staff to present the rationale and the facts of whatever location is finally recommended. There is, as members of council will know or committee will know, there's a lot of confusion. A couple of meetings ago we had a resident speak during open forum about geese, and she said, you know, the geese are an issue, and she spoke quite passionately about that. During the recess, I followed her out to ask her a little bit, and she had the location completely wrong. I showed her a map and said, well, where do you think the splash pad is going? And she pointed, and I said, no, it's 500 meters or more than that north. I had a resident again today come in with some concerns, pulled out the map. So there's lots of confusion on this topic. We think it's appropriate to present the facts when we know the facts to the community, so that they can make an informed decisions, and so council can make an informed decision. If you ask me how many trees would be removed, I've heard 4. That's the number of trees. But I can't tell you that for sure, because we don't know exactly where it would go, and we don't know exactly how big it would be. So I think the community deserves, and council certainly deserves, the opportunity to make an informed decision, a fully informed decision, and that's our intent to come to council. So I'd be happy to facilitate, Mr. Mayor, with council's direction, a public information session, so people can come, they can see the actual scale diagram of the location, see the mitigation steps in place, assuming that we can develop mitigation plans for the concerns that have been expressed.
Thank you, David. I think, the petitions there for action, and if your committee wants to support it or refer it, that's fine. But I think we were trying to answer some of the questions that weren't really addressed in the petition. So, and now, Councillor Minaj.
Who wouldn't accept that offer? What I would like to know, though, is I'd like to tie it to a timeline. And I see organizing an open public meeting drifting into late November at the earliest. Making sure that the master plan, knowing when the master plan is going to be brought forward as well. If it's next meeting, fine. But what I don't want to see happen, I want to make this quite clear, that this delay, and it is a delay in a decision-making process, will require an interruption, potential interruption, to a splash pad being built next year, and in the Port Elgin ward in particular. So if we're going to suggest a different timeline, I want to make sure that we tie the budget to the timeline and say we don't move forward with the budget we don't say yes to either splash pad for that matter, if we're going to, until we've had this open public meeting and we've made our final decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, or thank you, Councilor Minaj, through the Mayor. Our end date is the date that the fundraising committee are passionate about, and that's July 2017. A splash pad has minimal infrastructure. We are moving ahead with the building of a splash pad in Southampton, so that there's a lot of activity that continues. I don't see the steps of the master plan, knowing that the draft is available today or tomorrow, will significantly impact or put at risk our goal to have a splash pad operational in July 2017.
Thank you, David. Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also, David, it's hard to turn that kind of recommendation down, because I think there's some pretty solid principles around what you're saying, and with the impending, Recreation Master Plan about to be released, I suppose, and I think it's in the next week or two, you say, that we may have a chance to look at that. We don't know what it says in the Recreation Master Plan, so that information will be helpful. And I agree with your statement. I have a question for you too, Mr. Mayor Torreseo. I agree about, the fact that there was some misinformation. I took the liberty of visiting that site with 10 people at random, and 1 out of the 10 knew where the site of the splash pad was going to be placed, 1 out of 10. So I think there is some misinformation. But I want to pick up on a comment you made, though, is you said, we're not quite sure where the splash pad is going to be located. I thought I knew. So could you clarify for me then, am I misinterpreting where I believe, I walked that site with you where I thought it was going. Could you just clarify that one comment you made?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. And my intent, and perhaps I wasn't clear, is we know generally where it's going. We've got that open space. Probably better words were the exact footprint of where it will be.
That's fair. I just thought we were changing it completely. So thank you for that.
Okay, I think we've got a suggestion there. It might be. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Well, I would make the motion to refer this. I suppose the intent is to refer it to REACT or the Waterfront Committee. Where would you like to refer it?
I would say back to staff to take to and come back with it.
I would make the motion to refer this petition to staff and eagerly anticipate a report from staff, which has been promised. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Dave Myatt. Any further discussions on this, Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert?
Thank you. Would the intention then be that staff would report back to us at our next meeting, and then something might happen after that, or are we encouraging that if this idea of some sort of public consultation could take place in the absence of us at our next, because our next meeting is not for 2 weeks? Is it?
For clarity, I would make the suggestion that we give this to staff to proceed as rapidly as possible with a public meeting and invite it and give everybody an opportunity to speak to it. Okay, Councillor Minaj.
I would like staff to assure me that the grant applications can still proceed with the new timeline that we have just created, because they were working to a different timeline, and we have changed that.
Just for clarity, and I think David tried to clarify that, we are still working to the same timeline of a build in July of 2017. Councillor Dave Myatt.
I didn't mean that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I would just like to add to the motion, if the Deputy Mayor would allow, that it said as soon as practicable after receiving the Recreation Master Plan that the meeting be convened.
I don't have any trouble with that. I wanted to clarify, though, the intent really, to consult with the public is to consult with them with a plan, right? You're gonna come to them with a proposed location or locations, I guess, potentially, and go to them with that concept and consult with them with a real something solid, right? So there's a bit of a process take place here at the staff level to determine, based on the recreation master plan and the other work you're doing on the North Shore Park location, what final recommendation is going to be. And then we will take that for public consultation through your public meeting, and then it will return to council. Am I correct about that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we would be coming with I would describe it as a final final recommendation. I would also, though, like to reserve the right to tweak it if necessary based on public feedback, because we do want feedback from the public. We have heard feedback from the public. We've met on site. There's been lots of consultation with people. So, things like parking, we need to have a parking strategy. We need to be able to address that. The environmental mitigation, we need to address that. So it's nothing that's shocking or surprising. It's things that we would normally do in any park development.
No, we are, Councilor Minaj, we're not. We're discussing.
It seems to me like we're bringing up parking. We're going with this.
We're going with a public meeting on this to address these things.
On the splash pad. Why do we need to have a public meeting on the splash pad?
I think the public's entitled to have some input on where this site goes, and I think we should. So we do have a recommendation here, and I think it's time we call the question. We've had good discussion on it. I think the question is to refer it to staff to reach back to the public to get some input on the issues, primarily the location, but the issues around it. One more, Mike. Briefly, please.
I just want to, one thing that is getting overlooked a little bit, and I just want to throw out again a thank you to the hard-working group of people that are fundraising for a splash pad for Port Elgin. And I think what's happening, and I'm pleased, this is a statement I want to make, and I'm pleased that we're moving this on as quickly as we can, Mr. CEO. David, and in that, I think it's having an impact on the fundraising campaign, and I think the quicker we make a decision, the better. So I think the public input is a good thing. I just want to, shout out again to the fundraising committee that's doing a fabulous job under trying circumstances.
Thank you. So then I think everybody's clear on where our path is. Then I'm going to call the question. All in favor of that recommendation? Opposed, if any? Okay, that's carried. So the next item on the agenda is a report on municipal councillors or policy, and it's council report for West Ontario Power dividend budget change. And I believe the Deputy Mayor Charbonneau. No, sorry, this is Councillor Minaj's. Sorry, I jumped one. The next item is communications petitions for committee of the whole information. So there's 13 items there. If anybody has any comments on them, we'd be questions for clarity. Councillor Dave Mayap.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is with response to correspondence number 8, and it is a submission from the Saugeen Rail Trail Association asking for consideration of what would appear to be a pre-budget request for approval for their budget. We went through this last year where we entertained a request from the Saugeen Rail Trail Association, and we gave them some sort of pre-approval on their budget prior to normal budget deliberations. And I just want to caution that we don't find ourselves in a situation where anything or any budget line gets approved prior to going through the normal process.
Thanks, and I think that's probably the intent with all of these, unless there's a specific request from a council member for pre-budget approval. I think these will be entertained at the council. Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, item number 5, Canada's 150th Committee. Just so council knows, there'll be an invitation coming out to everyone to attend a meeting in 2 weeks to go over the plan that we have for the 150th celebrations in Saugeen Shores. So hopefully everybody that is available will be able to make it that night and see what our committee has put together.
Thanks, Don. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
I was just going to congratulate Councillor Matheson and Faye Minaj, who's sitting in the audience, for all of the effort they've put into the Canada 150 and encourage the same sort of thing. Thank you.
Anything else further on that? If not, then we will go down to item 6.1. And it's Council Report, West Ontario Power Dividend Budget Change, and Councillor Minaj.
I thought I was loud enough. Sometimes I am. So there were a couple of years where works crews, there were a third-party works crew that came on behalf of West Ontario Power and Ontario Hydro One, and they did knock on some doors, and some doors they didn't knock on, and people were away. But in the end, they took their very careful arborist approach. The arborist being the person who knows how to cut a tree properly so that it can still live. And they trimmed the branches back to the minimum standard that they have to ensure that we have safety with power when we need power in our community. So the point being that some of these trees, bushes, and shrubs were left living with anywhere up to 50% of their growth removed. And some residents took one look at the remaining amount of tree and said, I'm not going to live with that. I've got to do something about it. And they took it upon themselves to cut the rest of the tree down. There was not an option to engage the workforce and say, could I have the whole tree taken down at this time, please? So I've said there in point 3, there's no disagreement that this trimming work needed to be completed. In number 4, the residents, some were away, some were told, and at the time of the work. So there is a dividend amount that we receive, and in the last 3 years it's listed there. We put in a budgeted amount, and then the actual appears, and we look at the difference and we put it to a reserve account. So we put that into the Future Capitals Projects Reserve and Tax Stabilization Reserve. A potential year-end surplus transfer. So I'm asking that we take a modest amount of that, if it's there, $25,000, in both years 2017 and 2018, and we take that difference and we transfer it to a new operating account, one where we would be able to make that money available to these residents that are now left with a half a tree and not knowing what to do about it, in some cases. So the consideration then, we would obviously need a full-blown sort of process and a staff process and a staff report system that would say how they're going to notify these people. It's not hard to figure out who has a West Ontario power line or a Hydro One line going in front of their property, and it's you know, I've only given a few examples. So we could provide a time limit. I suggest a time limit. These are details, some of the details that could be worked into this. And the idea would be, even though it would not be normal policy for the town's contractor to do work on private property, many of us, and I am guilty of that too, I suppose. 25 years ago, I stuck a maple tree in the front of my property, right close to the property line. And after 25 years, much of the branches decided to grow into the transmission line and were dutifully removed, and so they should be. So I'm asking that we consider this, that we would include an education document that says how can, and maybe we should do that with, of course, all our new subdivisions and our new development all have underground power anyway, but certainly in the more older established areas where the power lines are going through, we could consider this as an option. So the first picture is one that shows you what 50% of a tree left looks like in front of that residence on River Street. These are close to where I live, Faye and I live. The next one is where the top of 3 fir trees has just been cut at 50% because it's actually, I believe those trees are on municipal property. So to my way of thinking, and if you go to the picture 3 and picture 4, you can see more of the need to remove these trees, and they've exposed some of the properties for against sun and weather and aesthetic look as well. So there's a few examples. The last 2 pages, in particular, I wanted to show you the one that's across from the cinemas, and that tree is all on. It's right behind the hydro pole, and that's all on municipal property. And I mean, we've just left it with about 4 branches left, so it's not particularly doesn't look very good. That's my point. So the last 2 pictures are. Oh, I've got more than 2 pictures. My bad. So I should have numbered the pictures. I thought I was going to get to show them on the screen, but I will do better in the future. You will see one where there is a large amount of grass showing and no trees. What I can tell you there is that after 50% of the limbs were removed, the owner of that property approached the line crew that was doing the work and said, "Any chance for a little side cash after the work is over? You can come back and remove the trees for me." And so he was able to barter a price and have all 3 of his big firs removed, and they were big. They were 100-year-old firs. So he decided to pay for those trees and have them removed. So last but not least, you can see another tree immediately in the area of where I live and my home, where I have a birch and a maple that have been cut, and you can see that it would have been a pecuniary interest if I'd have made this recommendation and then said I was going to take advantage of it. But since we have looked at our trees, we have decided that they still provide us with what we're looking for, and we'll live with the look. So that's my own residence. So why did I bring this to you? A number of people in the area who know that I'm on council said, "How can this be happening to us? What can we do about it?" They asked, they tried to stop some trees from being cut down, and the company said, "We can't do that." So I'm asking if there's a way we can approve staff to come back with a process that would allow people to make that decision now, make that determination. If they've got the one picture where there were 3 fir trees with the top half gone and only the bottom half remaining, maybe those trees would probably run around, my guess is $400 or $500 each to remove. So it's not something they're going to do willingly, but we could do the job right by providing them with some money, a grant, to access a grant that says we will fix this up for you. Thank you.
So, any comments? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful to have some sort of report as to what authority Hydro One and Westerio have to do work like this, and just how the town is actually involved in it. So then that might help us understand the potential we have to perhaps influence timing or whatever, and start from there. Because I also live, Neil had mostly, Councillor Minaj had mostly pictures of Port Elgin, but on my own street, the house across the street has a incredibly weird looking tree because it's been hacked a number of times. And again, the owners, it's the expense of cutting it down, they just leave it there, but it should have probably come down the first time. So I guess, but I'm not completely aware of how they have authority to go in, how that plays into the town's business. So I would be appreciative of that information. Thank you.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the Vice Deputy Mayor's request for more clarification of that issue. I wonder if we could ask our town's representative on the Westerio board to look into this. And, I think just for public relations, I've had personal experience at our cottage in Southampton of having trees taken down without any notice and debris left crushing flowers and ending up spending money grinding tree stumps and things like that. And I just think that, I'm sure that's happened to many other people, and I think it would be good PR on their part. And sometimes people are confused. Is the town doing this? Is Wisterio or Hydro One doing it? It'd be good to clarify. Thank you.
Councillor Dave Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, thank you, Councillor Minaj, for the homework you've obviously done on this. So just to be clear, my question is, and I'll get to I have a comment before I want you to answer the question, but the question is, are you proposing that there be a subsidy whereby the homeowner and the town would jointly pay for the removal of trees if they were brought to the point of being unsightly? And the comment is that I'm a little sensitive to this idea simply because many of the people that live in Saugeen Township are unfortunately not Wisterio customers. Yet the Wisterio ownership is one that is owned by all of Saugeen Shores. So the proceeds of any dividends that come out of Saugeen Shores should be spent to the benefit of all residents of Saugeen Shores, not just those that live within the settlement area. So I'm a little hesitant to entertain an idea where this money would be used for people that are only in town, whereas it wouldn't be available to somebody like myself or my neighbors. So but my first question is, are you proposing a grant that would pay up 25% of the cost of removal of the tree, or are you proposing that we pay for the whole removal of a tree?
So to answer both those questions, it was never my intent to make it an urban. It was my intent to say that anybody that had a tree removed by Wisterio Power, part tree removed, because they didn't take the whole tree, would have access to this funding if they wanted to now ask that the whole tree be removed. And I can add that I had a conversation with Mark Kramer in the past, and he said, we make lots of money for you as a corporation, and you've got lots of dividend, and you've got lots of money tucked away. If you want to do something that's not in our plans to do, then you fund it yourself. So that's exactly what I've proposed here, is that we fund an opportunity for residents to say the way they left the tree is not acceptable to me, and why should I have to pay for it? So I'm offering a chance to look at some of the Wisterio dividend to do that.
Any further comment? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just comment that this is an item that has obvious budget implications. The flow in of the dividend money, even if whatever comes in over and above the budget, does go back to future capital. But you'll remember that what often happens during the budget process is that future capital the tax stabilization reserve is used to offset operating costs, and then the flow back from things like Wisterio is used to rebalance the tax stabilization reserve. So this becomes an operating budget issue, and I believe that we should make a decision outside the operating budget for 2017, so that we're clear on what the impact is going to be to our spending next year. So I would say, I wonder if we could treat this as a budget request, and the councillor's recommendation could be given to staff to consider as part of a budget request, and we could that way we could get it all as part of the broader picture and decide whether this is something we want to fund or not. What am I thinking? We could refer it to staff. That's the word I should use. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think the recommendation is a request to review this report with a notion to support it and provide details for council's approval. I guess we can probably do that. I have a couple of comments with it. I am very uncomfortable with us using what is taxpayers' dollars to do work on private property. I think if you go down this path, you go to Southampton, there is several hundred ash trees infected with the Emmer ash borer, and do they apply? And that is hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have, if it's on our town property, and I think that's where we need to stay focused is on the town property. I'm not really keen on paying to do what amounts to landscaping on private property. That should be the landowner's responsibility. And if we want a program to take down trees on the town property that are unsightly, I guess, and I don't know who decides that, but I think staff can probably give us an idea on that. But I like your suggestion is refer this because it is a money issue to budget. Silence. Okay. Luke's made the motion and seconded by Councillor Madison. Any further discussion on it? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Would we still then receive some information about how it all happens? Because, outside firms are contracted. They're often here for a period of time. Town staff are kind of aware of the process. So, but I would appreciate a little bit of factual information about, just how it all unfolds. Because if a homeowner potentially has the chance to influence, the timing of work on their own property and perhaps the extent of it, is that a possibility? I don't know. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've dealt with exactly the same situation in another municipality, and council extended an invitation to the president of the local utility to come in and speak to council about the process. They accepted that happily and felt it as a way to engage with the community. In fact, they brought their arborist who showed pictures about how they decide how to prune a tree, and I would call it pruning the tree. So we could certainly extend that invitation to the West Ontario staff, and if it's also Hydro One, we could do that the same. Probably West Ontario would give you a sense. And it gives council an opportunity to share your expectations as well, or suggestions for community consultation. Can you do a notice in the paper 2 weeks before, so at least people have a sense of what's happening, and then also how often they do this type of an awareness opportunity.
Okay, so we have a recommendation to refer to staff for budget. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So, the next item on the agenda is another council report, and it's Unifor Industrial Wind Turbine, and Deputy Mayor Charbonneau would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You can tell that Councillor Minaj and I were talking about doing councillor recommendations after the last council meeting, since we both brought one today. Neat, different way to do this. I'm not going to read this whole report to you, but just to express, and council's well aware of what has occurred here. You'll know that we, dating back to the time when this Unifor turbine was started, we had a promise from Unifor and from MOECC that acoustic auditing would be done, and a promise from Unifor that it would be, well, CAW at the time, but now Unifor, that it would be shared with the public, those audit results, up to and including today. No audit has been done. We had a series of complaints-based handheld tests that were done by MOECC staff back in 2013 that were brought forward by STOP through an FOI request that showed that there were concerning results from noise testing, results that may indicate that the turbine is operating in exceedance of the noise limits that it is allowed to operate under according to its certificate of approval. We met with MOECC staff and STOP, and the mayor and myself and the vice deputy mayor were there, along with CAO back in February. And at that meeting, we were told that the acoustic audit would be done finally, and it would be done in June. So you'll recall we passed a resolution on February 29th addressing that and laying out some expectations that this council had for how MOECC and Unifor would inform the public of the results of that audit. I followed up with MOECC in June, and was told that the audit, that there was preliminary testing being done and had been being done in the spring, but that testing was not a formal audit, and that at that stage they weren't expecting the audit till September. So then I followed up again in September and was told that the preliminary monitoring continued, that they were still doing preliminary monitoring but had not yet done the audit because of weather, lack of wind, and turbine downtime. And the MOECC advised me at that time that they expected that the audit would be done in March or April of 2017. Then, in a letter on October 5th, 2016, MOECC advised that they expected Unifor to complete the testing no later than May 2017, to be completed by June 2017, fully a year later than they had originally promised the testing, fully 5 years later than MOECC and Unifor had originally promised auditing that would be released publicly. So the timeline continues to slip. It continues to slip into the future. I have virtually no confidence that the testing dates that have been given to us at this point will stick, since none of the last 3 dates have stuck. And meanwhile, we continue to get complaints about the operational term. I got one sent to me. It's on my phone here because I have to use 2 screens, but just came in September 29th, and I'm not going to read the name of the person, but I quote, "On September 29, 2016, the Unifor industrial wind turbine is again noisy, producing a thumping pulse that was still focused on our property at 4:30 a.m. Again, we have been subjected to headaches and can't sleep from the constant pulse of the wind machine. Very unhealthy. This situation continues to be unacceptable at all levels." This is just, 2 weeks ago. I mean, there's been 50 such complaints since we passed our resolution at the end of February. So the situation continues to be acute for a few people in the community, and the promised testing continues not to be done, and the date continues to get pushed into the future. So you'll see my considerations that I have put there, and my view is it's just completely unacceptable. We've waited this long. We can't wait any longer. My view is that there's no reason why this audit can't be done now. They're doing preliminary testing on the ground right now. And if they can't do the audit right now, they could at least tell us what's happened with the preliminary testing. They've been doing preliminary testing now since May or June, heading on, 4 or 5 months. So we should know what's happening with this turbine. We should know now. And MOECC should also really want to know. And there's something, I think, broken in their system, in their process, that they don't ever demand to know, since they regulate the thing. So that's why I have given you the recommendation that we write a letter and that we include the Ombudsman of Ontario in the letter from this council, because not only is it a problem for these few people in the south end of Port Elgin, but it's also a problem with MOEC systems that needs to be identified and highlighted. And unfortunately, it's the second break in a year in MOEC processes that I have identified quite painfully. So I feel like the Ombudsman ought to look carefully at that ministry, because there's problems in that ministry, serious ones. So you have my recommendation, and I submit it for your support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Luke. I guess maybe what I should do is read the recommendation and then take any questions, and then we'll call a question on it. The recommendation is that Council send a letter to the local office of the MOECC, to the Minister of MOECC, and to the Ombudsman of Ontario, advising that we are deeply concerned about the continuing delays in completing the acoustic audit and calling for a mandatory audit to be done before the end of the year, and failing that, for Unifor to be required to submit the results of a preliminary testing to the Ministry and the public by December 31st, 2016. Now, is there any questions? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Is there the potential to somehow have this letter released publicly too, so the community sees that we're trying and that we're doing something?
Sure. I think we can probably draft one between now and the next council meeting, and we can add it on to for Committee of the Whole's information, a copy of the letter, so that it'll be a record of the public. That's satisfactory. Any further questions? Then I guess I'll call a question. All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? If any? That's carried. So that's, I believe, the end of our agenda. We'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Matheson and Deputy Mayor Charbonneau. We'll take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 8:40.